doing data visualization, but I get to work with lots of great colleagues coming up with all kinds of data solutions, from data modeling and ETL, strategic data assessments, all kinds of really cool solutions that work well together, and that's a lot of fun. I am a Tableau Zen master. In fact, I've been nominated by Tableau 5 times, and then after that, they said, "We'll put you in the Hall of Fame." So I'm a Hall of Fame Zen master, and that's an incredible honor, but also very humbling to be in that group of people. I do have a book, Learning Tableau. I know it's 2020 now. I am actually working on that edition, uh, but it's hard to work on it until there are some releases out. But Tableau 2020.1 is out, so that's a lot of fun too. Here are some of the most fun people in my life. In fact, I'm spending a lot of time now with them since the schools are closed down, and this was our Easter picture. Uh, these uh, these four children are uh, just a lot of fun. You may hear them in the other room screaming or crying or laughing or running around. That's some of the fun of being home together during these times. Now, my wife is not pictured here. She saw a version of this slide and said, "Why am I not on there?" I said, "Well, I can put you on there if you'd like." She said, "No." So, so this is what you get to see. Uh, but having children, I get to enjoy a lot of animated movies, including The Lion King. Uh, so that's going to be our theme today, as we go through this, is that data is everywhere, and it touches everything that we do. Or maybe I should reverse that and say that everything we do generates data that contains a lot of value. But that value sometimes can be hidden or hard to find. So we'll talk about some ways to pull that out, especially as we go through what I like to call the cycle of analytics. And you may be thinking, what is the cycle of analytics? Is it a term that I just made up? Well, no, I didn't make it up. In fact, if you were to Google cycle of analytics, you'll come up with all kinds of interesting charts and explanations, and everyone's got a little bit different take on it. So here's one take, and I'm going to go through several of these. Don't worry about trying to write this down or capture it, because I'm going to talk a little bit about what I like about some of these, and then a little bit about what I don't like. But this is one way to think of that cycle of analytics, or here they call it the data life cycle. So you can see data is created, and then they call it synthesized and stored, and then you might get rid of it, or you might access it to analyze it, and then ultimately share it with other people. So that's a helpful kind of way of thinking about it. I really like this next one. Uh, and the reason I really like it is that it is similar to the way that I and members of my team at Teknion think about data, especially starting off with what is called here a BI assessment. Now, uh, at Teknion, we'll call it a strategic data assessment. So it's even maybe a little bit broader than just business intelligence, but thinking through what data do you have, where are you currently in your data transformation journey, where do you want to be, and how do you get there? But I do like the idea that you kind of start off with that assessment. And then here, this cycle goes on into designing maybe a data model and figuring out how to extract the data, transform it, uh, move it into a data warehouse. That's something I love data warehouses. We'll do that a lot at Teknion as well, building out data warehouses because it standardizes the data, makes it easier to get to and to analyze. And then you'll see there are a lot of possibilities from there. You can mine the data, report the data, do even some really interesting things with predictive analytics and that sort of thing. And it treats it as a cycle because it is an iterative process. So that's another way to potentially think about this cycle of analytics. Here's yet another way. Uh, Maybe starting off with an objective and then trying to understand the data and then clean it up analyze it, and visualize it. So that's another way that someone has come up with to think about this cycle of analytics. Now, all of these are useful to think about, and just having a mental model of how do we think about data, I think is important. Uh, and there are things that I like about each of these charts. But there's one thing that stands out to me that I really don't like about each of these, and that's this piece right here. Now, in fact, I really do like data visualization and sharing the data story, and even reporting can be very useful. But what I don't like about how these charts have communicated that is that they see it as just a piece of the cycle. Maybe it's the end goal, or maybe it's just somewhere thrown in there that, oh yeah, we might want to visualize this and do some visual analytics on the data. But I think that kind of misses the power and potential of data visualization. I'm going to share with you another way of thinking of this cycle of analytics, and it's a way that I think about it, and it's maybe a little bit simplified. So let's take a little bit closer look at at data visualization. Another thing about having children is that I occasionally have some dad jokes there. So let's look at visualization. Here's my simplified mental model of the cycle of analytics. It's got four components. So we might start out with data discovery, thinking about what data is there. Let's understand it a little bit. Let's just figure out what we have and maybe what we need. Uh, Prepping the data, so getting it ready for analysis, and then we're able to do an analysis on it. And ultimately, we are going to want to share our results. And it is definitely a cycle. One step leads to the next, leads to the next. Uh, but it's very iterative, and there's no definite order, because I could start to do some discovery and even prep the data a little bit, but then realize I need to discover more data or bring more data in. I need to prep that. As I analyze it, I'm going to realize that maybe I needed to restructure it a little bit to accomplish my analysis needs. And once I tell one story from the data or show some key insights, that's definitely not the end of that journey. It's going to continue and repeat, and we're going to continue to ask deeper questions, more meaningful questions, and gain deeper insights. Where is data visualization in this cycle? It's everywhere, because I need to be looking at the data and visualizing it at every step along the way. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk through with an example or several examples of how I might do this as I go through this cycle of analytics. So walk with me on this journey, and what we'll see as we go through it is that I can leverage data visualization to answer all kinds of questions. So for example, in data discovery, I'm going to visualize the data in order to see lots of different things. I want to understand what data we have. Uh, I'm going to be learning where that data is stored. I'm going to be trying to figure out what's there. Uh, but also important is, what data are we missing? So as I'm visualizing it, I'm going to see the gaps and the holes, and I'm going to have to be somewhat intentional about that, and we'll talk about how that works as well. I want to be able to see data that maybe can't even be used, or data that we can't trust. So I want to find the errors in the data. I want to find data that's just too messy, or has too many gaps or holes, or that wasn't captured correctly. And I want to find that really quickly in my discovery process, because I don't want to waste time prepping that data or trying to analyze it. Let's find that right away. I want to find data problems. Some problems can be fixed, but I need to find them and figure out how I'm going to fix them. Uh, I need to understand what kinds of analysis is possible, and we'll talk about that. What kinds of questions am I going to be able to answer with the data? What kinds of questions am I not going to be able to answer? And I want to be able to see that. Uh, and I'm also, as I'm discovering what I have in the data, I'm going to find places where I'm going to need to create calculations, maybe maybe complex models. I'm going to have to bring in experts. But until I start to see the data itself, I may not have a complete picture of everything that's going to be needed as I get the data ready for the next step in the cycle. And then I'm also potentially, even here, going to start to raise questions that we didn't even know we had. So the organization is going to have some questions that they know they want to answer from the data, but even as I start to see what data is there and what it contains, I'm going to start raising new questions very early on in this process to bring back to the business owners or the C-level stakeholders and show them that there are potentially even deeper insights than what we realized at first. So let's take a look at this. Now I'm going to use Tableau. That's my tool of choice that I love. But realize that data visualization could be used, and we could use almost any tool that we wanted to accomplish some of the same things. So my examples today are going to be from the healthcare industry, and as we've seen recently, uh, we need to have a lot of care, uh, especially with this data, and a lot of integrity because lives are at stake, and so being able to understand the data even at the very beginning of the process is going to be key. So one thing that I might start to do is just profile the data itself to understand, here's maybe a patient visits table of data, and I'm going to start to understand, how much of the data is textual, uh, what types of data do I have, and so those are probably important to see, just a big picture. But then at a field level, I might start to try to understand how much data do I have? Where are there potentially problems? So here on the admit date, I can see I've only got 11% of the data that has actual values. That would seem to be a huge kind of a problem if about 90% of my data is null. And I need to understand that right up front. Uh, maybe I've got something wrong with the data connection. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong field. Uh, Maybe the data is not being stored correctly or being captured correctly. It's going to raise a lot of questions in my mind, but just being able to see it is important. Some of these others, I can say, well, if I didn't have a lot of comments, maybe that's not a big deal. But some of these, I'm definitely going to want to understand and know that I really should have an admit date for most patients. And then I'm going to drill in on some of the details. So I might look at that admit date and start to try to understand, what do I have. So I've got 407 patients or records here. Uh, January 1900. Well, that's probably a data error. That's a default date when something's null or something's missing. Uh, so so I'm starting to understand where there are potential errors or problems in the data. So I may go back to the ETL team and tell them they need to clean that up, or I may, at this point, if I'm just doing data discovery, I may decide that we need to figure out if the data is not being captured correctly, or are these historic records from some legacy system that we don't even care about. All of those are sorts of things that we need to understand. For now, I'll exclude them and I'll start to look at uh, other things that we've got going on, and I see that once I get rid of that, I've got historical data going back to December of 2018, which is really interesting, and then 2019. So I've really only got about a year's worth of data here. Is that enough data to accomplish my analytic goals? I'll have to raise that question. Uh, did we switch over systems at some point, and that's why I'm missing historical records? Or am I just sampling the data? So lots of different things I need to consider, but those are the types of questions that just seeing it allows me to understand. And then I've got some interesting data here. Uh, Dates that are in the future. So some dates in April, even some dates into May. Are those mistakes? I mean, this is patient admit date, so I shouldn't have patients admitted in the future. But is it possible that the source system allows a scheduling of an admit date in the future. So maybe these are accurate dates. Uh, Again, questions that I may not know the answer to, but just seeing it really helps me understand it. And then I can, I start to see here how many patient admissions there are on a monthly basis, and I start to see maybe there are seasonal patterns. If I drill in to the week level or even the day level, I start to see some very interesting patterns here. So certain dates with a lot of admissions versus maybe what the average is, and then maybe even some gaps in time, um, which is also very interesting to think about. Why are there gaps in the data? Maybe those are weekends or holidays, but in a hospital, I might expect that people would still be admitted on those days. So what's going on? I'd have to figure that out, um, and uh, and understand what's going on there. I might look at other fields too, arrival date, uh, and do some of the same kinds of things. So I know when they were admitted, but when did they arrive? Should that be the same date? Are there some differences there? And I might do some of the same sort of analysis here to try to drill into detail. And interestingly, here, if it's coming through on the webinar, you can kind of see that there's a secondary pattern in the data there. Um, Probably the difference between weekends and weekdays. That could be an interesting thing to think about. And I do this for each field. As I'm looking at it, I want to visualize it and see what's going on. So a field like birth date could be very interesting to think about, just to see the pattern of when people were born, when the patients were born, and then looking at what the age is and seeing, is that what I would expect, the average age being about 50 with a standard deviation there. That kind of makes sense. Why do I have a lot of patients who are 1 or 2? Um, is that newborns being counted? Why are they age 1? So some interesting ideas. I'm going to see some outliers. I've got a patient who's 126 years old. Is that a data error? Or is it their age as of today, but when they were admitted in the hospital, that was 20 years ago? Is that a historical record? So I'm going to have to really think through some things, but visually seeing is going to help me to think about those types of questions and think about, is the data valid, or are my assumptions possibly not valid? It might be useful to take a look at a comments field and to see, what's, some information about the average length of characters, the minimum and maximum, but also just to see what are the most common comments. This text field looks like yes, refuse, no. Looks like maybe most people are using this to answer a yes or no question. I need to figure out what that question is. I need to figure out, are any of these other uh, comments, are they useful for anything? Could I do some data mining or textual analysis and come up with anything interesting? Maybe even looking at it as a word cloud might help me understand what kinds of things are in the data that could be interesting, or not useful at all. Uh, there may be nothing here, but it may be a useful field that contains data that I would have never even considered before. And I could go on and on. And this is just discovering what's in the data, raising questions, understanding what I have, what I don't have, and potentially even figuring out what kinds of analysis is possible. So that's data discovery. Uh, that's the first step in the cycle. Now, as I've discovered problems or structures of data that don't necessarily work well for the analysis that I want to do, I'm going to be thinking about, how do I prep that data? How do I get it into the structures and clean it up? Uh, And a lot of times, historically, what we've done is we've turned that over to IT or an ETL team and said, hey, build a model, build a data warehouse. And that's great. I love data warehouses, but we should be looking at that data even as the data warehouse is built, or even as we're populating some structures of data, because we need to be prepared as we go along. And we're going to use data visualization in this step to understand some things. We're going to prototype and prove out structures of data. Rapid prototyping is a buzzword that I hear a lot when it comes to building out a data warehouse, but it's really a key concept for understanding how do we build something out rapidly that really works. And data visualization is key when it comes to building out those rapid prototypes of data structures, and then formalizing them into a data mart or data warehouse. We want to find issues early, so we know we're going to make mistakes as we try to clean up the data. We know that some of our calculations will be wrong, but let's find those quickly and early so that we can fix them. And by the time we're actually using that data or turning it over to business users, they're going to have trust in the data and know that we have fixed the issues that we found early. And let's use data visualization to validate some of the transformations that we've made as we go along. And I mentioned building trust. We would definitely want our end users to trust the data, and key in that is the fact that we caught our mistakes, we fixed them, and we are confident, and we've built that confidence in the data itself. So how would that look? How would we accomplish that? Well, let's think through several different iterations here. So I've got how the data itself might look, just in a tabular format. What we're going to consider here is ER efficiency. So just measuring the minutes from the time a patient arrives in the ER to the time that they're admitted. Uh, and as I look through the data, I mean this looks pretty good. Um, if I look at it this way, uh, nothing's really standing out to me. I mean, I see patients admitted 62 minutes, 21 minutes, 40 minutes later, uh, and I don't see any major issues with the data. But data visualization can start to uncover some of the issues that maybe occurred in that ETL or the data prep process. So was the calculation of minutes correct? Let's visualize that and see what we think. So I might want to look at it as sort of a distribution of of intervals of time. So 5-minute intervals. How many patients fell within each interval of time? And so even just visualizing this, one thing that stands out to me immediately is if I'm looking at a histogram. This is not the shape that I usually expect to see. I usually expect sort of that bell curve kind of a shape. And this is more of most patients were admitted 10 to 15 minutes after they arrived, and then fewer 15 to 20, 20 to 25, and it kind of decreases. That could be right, but that's not incredibly realistic. So even just looking at it, I think there's something wrong with the way that we've calculated the number of minutes. Something in our calculation doesn't quite give me the shape of the data that I would expect as I look at it. So I go back to the ETL team. I say, hey, double check your calculations. They say, oh yeah, we messed that up. Let's rerun that. And so they rerun it. And now I'm going to take a look again at the number of patients who arrived in these intervals. Now that's much more of the shape that I would expect to see. If some patients are seen fairly quickly, most patients are kind of seen in this middle group, and then it kind of trails off towards the end. So the shape is right, but some of you have noticed that there's another problem here. Negative 20 minutes. So they were admitted 20 minutes before they even arrived. We have time traveling patients. No, we don't have time traveling patients. Now I could even bring this out a little bit more clearly just by putting something on color. So something is still wrong with our calculation. We're getting negative values for time. Maybe it's not the calculation, maybe it's the data itself, but either way, I need to figure out what's going on. So I go back to the ETL team. They double check their calculations. Maybe they fix it. Maybe they figure out that there's something going on in the data. But either way, we iterate through this very quickly, and ultimately we come up with not only the shape of data that we expect, but also values that we expect as well. So some patients are admitted as soon as 10 minutes. But most patients, it's a little bit later. And of course, we're going towards the idea that ultimately we want to analyze this. We want to come up with solutions that make our ER more efficient and push this curve uh, to the left so that more patients are seen more quickly. And then we'll compare that with patient outcomes. And we'll do even deeper analysis. But this is still early in the cycle of analytics, and we're getting there. But you can even start to see uh, how we're getting there and how we're catching and fixing problems before I turn this over to the people who are going to be making life and death decisions. So that's data prep. We want to catch those issues quickly. How about analysis? So we talk about visual analytics. So now we're moving into something where we kind of expect that we're going to be using some visualization. Here we want to guide the analysis. Sometimes we come into the data and we have a rigid set of expectations of this is the analysis we're going to do. But as we see the data, we really need to be a little bit flexible and understand that our analysis may change based on what we see in the data. Of course, we want to answer the questions that we've raised, but we also want to raise some new questions along the way. Uh, we want to see things and then probe deeper. And this also helps us understand context. So sometimes we've asked a very specific question about a very specific group of patients in the hospital, but we need to understand that in the larger context. And sometimes seeing that larger context can be very useful. Sometimes it's the opposite. We want to narrow the focus. So we start kind of with that big picture, and it raises some interesting questions that we need to narrow in on. Uh, and broadening the focus uh, is definitely something that we might consider as well. So what does that look like? Well, let's consider an analytical question. How many patients with congestive heart failure were admitted how many times? That is, how many visits does an individual patient have to the hospital when they've had a diagnosis of congestive heart failure? Here's one way of visualizing that so that we can see, okay, of our patient population that we've narrowed in on, we've got 84 patients who were admitted one time. We've got 32 who were admitted 3 times. And the shape of the data is kind of what I would expect or hope for, that most patients, we see them once, we treat them, and they move on and hopefully do well. But some patients are going to come back a few times, and some patients are going to come back many, many times, and we're going to have questions about why. Why are they coming back? When are they coming back? How long are they staying? This visualization doesn't answer all of those questions. It answers only how many patients are coming, how many times. So we need to think about the fact that we've got to we might need to visualize this in different ways. So one possibility is to ask the question, when are these patients coming, and how long are they staying? So for that, I might do something like this. I might look at when do they arrive, and I can see all of my arrival dates, and I might split that up by patient. I want to know each patient. One note about this particular data set, so it's all fake data for one thing. No uh, violations of any HIPAA rules or anything like that. But second of all, since it is fake and I've had a chance to massage it, I can use patient name and be sure that each of these is indeed a unique patient. But in a real life, I'd pull in that patient ID as well to make sure I'm looking at a unique patient. But I want to know, okay, so here's when they were admitted. How long did they stay in the hospital? And I'm building out a Gantt chart here, and I can see some patients came in maybe once. I can see some came in multiple times, but their stays were short, but maybe close together. Some patients are more spread out. So already I'm starting to see a a lot of analytical possibility here. But I'm also reminded when I look at this, and when I very first built out a visualization like this, it reminded me of the personal nature of data visualization, because this was the first time that I actually had been doing data visualization for a while. But then I realized each one of these marks on here, each one of these Gantt bars, is a real person who came to a real hospital with a real serious issue, and potentially came back multiple times with that issue or other issues. And it really made me have a lot of uh, it caused me to have a lot of humility when I approached the data, and it helped me realize that what I do, I need to do it with integrity, and I need to do it uh, with care, because what I'm doing makes a difference. And in this case, potentially a life and death difference. So then I'm going to look here, and I'm going to start to try to understand, did they come in for congestive heart failure? That's what I've decided to focus on here. Did they not? So here they did. Let's look at each individual visit. So I can see some of the visits were indeed for congestive heart failure. Some of them were not, and so that could be key in understanding why they came in or how their treatment progressed. Now, this is a different way of visualizing it than what we first looked at, uh, but both analyses are important. And I can take both of these and put them together in a dashboard and make it interactive. And now I can really start to do even deeper analysis, and I can start to look at how these relate to each other. So, for example, patients who visited 5 times, when and how long did they come in? There are all the patients who visited 5 times. How about 6 times or more? So just building in a little bit of interactivity between my data visualizations, I can start to really understand uh, the relationships and some of the deeper analysis that might be involved. So definitely data visualization for analysis. And I think that's something that we all expect. But as I've worked through it, it's key. It's key to be able to see and understand the data. All right, one more Lion King image, and this is a reminder to me to check the time. And if I'm behind, I'll realize I just need to Mufasa. Data storytelling. So here's where I want to share uh, what I've uncovered in the analysis. I want to communicate that clearly and effectively to others. So a lot of times we'll call that data storytelling, just as a broad principle. And of course, I think we all understand that data visualization is key there, because everyone is, um, when we take something abstract like data, even when it represents something real, like a patient in a hospital, uh, we do need to be able to communicate it beyond just looking at facts and figures. We need to be able to see it. Uh, and so here we're going to visualize it to inform other people. So sometimes it's just to pass along information, but often it's going to be to persuade other people. Look, here's why patients are coming back multiple times. Here are the changes that we need to make in the way that we operate the hospital. Uh, and so it may be to persuade. It may be to call out risks and to say, here are some factors that that are that that play into the dangers that we're seeing, or call out opportunities to say here's some points where we can really benefit, uh, either financially or patient outcomes or all kinds of possible opportunities there. And ultimately, we may want to motivate change within the organization. In fact, ultimately, that's what we probably really set out to do from the very beginning of this cycle. We realized there are places that we can change and decisions that we can make, but now we need to communicate it in such a way that it truly motivates that change that everyone agreed that we needed to undertake, but now we need to really think it through. So consider, for example, a story that I might want to tell. Here's just a narrative of that story. So in July, we implemented a trial initiative for a subset of patients, and I'm even going to tell you how many patients that is. So not an insignificant number. And the trial was, it included a set of 7-day follow-up procedures. So I discharge the patient from the hospital and I give them a new set of follow-up procedures. Maybe I'm following up with them via phone or some other way of communicating. But this initiative was just a test of new procedures. And in subsequent months, we saw a dramatic reduction of readmissions of 6 to 8%. Now, I just told you a story and I included elements from the data, but you're going to walk away from this and you're not going to remember any of the numbers. It's a little bit ambiguous. It's a little bit meaningless. But imagine if you saw the story presented visually. So here we have before we tried this trial, we see the readmission rates uh, somewhere between 36% was about normal, and then we implemented this trial for a subset of patients. So we tracked them separate from other patients, and we did see a rather dramatic decrease. Uh, and just visually, you can understand that far better than if I tried to explain it with just words. But actually seeing it, you'll remember this later today when you think about data storytelling. You'll remember this story because of the way it was explained. And then I've added something to this story that I didn't have in the text, but I've added a recommendation or a call to change. Sometimes that's an important part of the story, sometimes not. But just saying, hey, let's implement this beyond just a trial of a subset of patients. Let's do this with all the patients we discharge, or all the patients we discharge with a certain diagnosis. Let's follow up more broadly. So that's the cycle of analytics. Uh, and I hope that I've convinced you today that visualization, data visualization, is a key aspect of every component of it, whether we're just discovering what data we have or don't have, whether we're trying to prep that data and restructure it, whether we're analyzing it or communicating it. Data visualization plays a key role in everything that we do with the data. I'd like to thank you all for joining. We do have just a bit of time, about 10 minutes for Q&A. So there is a Q&A panel. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in there, and I would be more than happy to answer them. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions. That's perfectly fine. If you do come up with anything, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much. I'm excited about kicking off this webinar series. We also have other webinar series that will continue at Teknion. as well as our traditional Tableau webinars. We'll be kicking off a bunch of those really soon as well. So in the meantime, stay safe and healthy, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you again.